Jack Whitmore gripped the worn leather of his saddle tighter as the wind cut across Dry Creek like a blade. The desert was different at night, quieter, sharper, more watchful. The moonlight stretched long, broken shadows across the empty main street as he stared at the building at the far end of town. The church. It stood alone, dark and rigid, like some old sentinel that had seen too much and promised nothing good to anyone who came close. The wooden cross on top leaned to the left, bent and splintered, pointing at the horizon, as if accusing the desert itself. Jack's horse shifted nervously beneath him. The animal wasn't usually skittish, but the way its ears pinned back, the way it refused to look at the building, it made the hair on the back of Jack's neck prickle. That was the moment it hit him. He wasn't just looking at an old church. He was staring down something the entire town had already decided to walk away from. A few hours earlier, the sun had still been high and blinding when he signed the papers. $1, Raymond Kessler had said, leaning back in his chair like a man who'd already won a game no one else understood. "You can't even buy a decent sandwich with $1 these days, Mr. Whitmore." Jack had smirked. "Maybe not, but I can buy a church." Kessler's laugh was hollow. "Sometimes $1 buys more trouble than a man can carry." Jack thought it was just some kind of frontier bravado. Dry Creek was a small town bigger than a trading post, but smaller than anything civilized. One saloon, one general store, one sheriff's office, one church, and a lot of wind. He was a businessman, not a fool. Empty buildings in dying towns were cheap, and Jack Whitmore made a living turning forgotten places into something useful. The deed was slid across the desk like a joke no one was brave enough to laugh at. Now, hours later, the joke didn't seem that funny. He dismounted and walked toward the church, boots crunching on the dirt road. What struck him first wasn't the building itself, but the ground around it. Every other place in town showed the wear of everyday life: steps worn smooth, hitching posts dark with oil, from rains dust kicked into hard-packed paths by passing boots. But here the grass had grown wild up to the front steps. No beaten path, no boot marks, no signs anyone had come close in years, and more unsettling still, the way the town seemed to bend around it. Even earlier that day, from the saloon's window, Jack had watched people take the long way around rather than pass in front. They crossed to the other side of the street like there was an invisible fence. He ran his thumb over the cold iron key in his pocket, the one Kessler had dropped into his palm, with a grin that didn't reach his eyes. $1. One church. One whole damn town pretending it didn't exist. Lena Vargas had been the only one to say anything real to him. She owned the inn across from the station, a woman with weathered eyes that had seen more than she cared to speak of. "I wouldn't go there at night," she'd told him flatly, handing him his room key. "Hell, I wouldn't go there at all." "Why's that?" he'd asked, thinking maybe she'd mentioned bats rot or vandals. She'd just shrugged, but her knuckles had whitened on the countertop. "Because everyone who does ends up leaving, one way or another." Jack was good at telling when people were trying to scare him. Lena hadn't been. She'd been trying to warn him. He climbed the front steps. The wood creaked beneath his boots, dry, brittle, like bones snapping under weight. A sandstorm had left a film of dust on the door, and when he brushed it with his hand, he saw faint gouges around the keyhole. Not from neglect, from someone trying to keep something out or in. He paused the key halfway to the lock. "Get a grip," he muttered under his breath. "It's just an empty building." But the silence around him wasn't the kind of silence he'd known before. This wasn't peaceful. It was the kind that listened back. He didn't unlock the door, not yet. Instead, he stepped down and circled the building. The grass around the sides grew high, nearly up to his knees. The moonlight caught something faint in the dirt, a disturbance. Jack crouched down. Footprints. They weren't his. Smaller. Lighter. Leading all the way around the church. Someone had been here. Watching. Waiting. By the time he returned to his hotel room, the wind had died and the town had gone to sleep. Dry Creek didn't have much nightlife, not anymore. The only sound was the rattling of the inn's window pane as Jack shut himself in and locked the door. He sat at the small desk with the deed to the church laid out in front of him. 1 Tochond. A date. Kessler's signature. His own. But there was something else, the way the innkeeper's warning sat heavy in his chest. The way Kessler hadn't even hesitated to sell it. The way the church itself seemed to wait. Jack poured himself a finger of whiskey, the kind that burned more than it warmed, and stared out the window at the dark outline of the church at the end of the street. That was when he saw it. A figure stood in front of the church, not moving, not walking, just standing. The wind brushed the woman's dress, long and dark, but her face was turned straight toward his window. She didn't shift, didn't flinch, just watched. And then she was gone. No sound, no footsteps, nothing. He grabbed his coat and ran downstairs out into the cold, dusty street. But when he reached the church, there was no one. No footprints this time. Just the night. But she had been there. He wasn't drunk, he wasn't imagining it. He felt the certainty in his bones, the way you feel thunder before it breaks. Jack exhaled slowly. The night air smelled like sagebrush and rust. He looked up at the church again. Tomorrow, he muttered to himself. Tomorrow I'll see what the hell's inside. As he walked back to the inn, something thin and pale fluttered against the doorframe. A folded piece of paper slipped under the inn door. He opened it. 4 words. Written in hurried, uneven strokes. Don't trust anyone here. Jack stared at the words for a long time, long enough that the wind turned them cold in his hands. The figure at the church, the footprints in the grass, the silent stares from townsfolk. It all stacked like a deck of bad cards. He hadn't been in Dry Creek a full day, and already someone wanted him scared. He poured the last of the whiskey into the sink. If there was one thing he hated more than losing money, it was walking away from a mystery that didn't want to be solved. Jack wasn't just buying a church. He was walking into something buried. And whatever it was, the town wanted it to stay buried. The sun hadn't yet broken the horizon, but Dry Creek was already awake, just not in the way most towns came to life. No breakfast smoke, no wagon wheels, no dog barking at the edge of a field. Just that same uneasy stillness Jack Whitmore was quickly learning to distrust. He stood at the edge of the churchyard, again boots buried in dew-damp weeds, staring at the front steps. In the cold light of morning, the building looked even more out of place. Everything else in town bore the mark of age, sun-bleached wood, scuffed steps, hinges groaning from years of wind and sand. But the church felt paused, not forgotten, not decayed, just waiting. He stepped closer and paused near the door where the keyhole was ringed with those same gouges he'd noticed last night. This time he crouched and ran his fingers over them. Jagged edges, shallow, uneven. Someone had tried to claw the lock apart, either trying to break in or desperate to keep something out. Jack stood and finally slipped the iron key into the lock. It turned stiffly like it hadn't been used in years. When the bolt gave, the door creaked inward with a groan that echoed too loud in the morning quiet. He stepped inside. The smell hit first. Not rot, he knew that scent. This was different. Metal and mildew and something stale like old sweat soaked into the bones of the place. Dust danced in beams of sunlight, knifing through the gaps in the boarded windows. Wooden pews lined the sanctuary in perfect rows, untouched by time but cloaked in shadow. Cobwebs hung like lace in the corners. At first glance, it looked exactly like an abandoned church should. But that feeling like the air was pressing against his skin told a different story. Jack walked down the aisle, each step echoing louder than it should. The boards beneath his boots groaned like they were protesting the weight of the truth walking across them. At the altar, he paused. It was simple, nothing ornate, just old pine, sanded smooth. Behind it, the wooden cross was still mounted to the wall, barely upright, its base chipped and splintered. That's when he noticed it. The wall behind the altar had been repaired. Badly. Newer planks, lighter in color, with nail heads still shiny in the morning light. Whoever patched it hadn't tried to blend it in. They just wanted it sealed. He reached out and ran his fingers over the edge of the repair. The nails had been driven hard, splitting the wood in some places. Someone had wanted this shut tight. Not hidden. Just shut. Then he heard it. A whisper of movement outside boots shifting in dirt. Jack spun and looked through the cracks in the boarded window. Standing across the street was the same woman from last night. Tall, dark dress posture, stiff. Her face was shadowed beneath a wide-brimmed hat. He stepped forward ready to call out, but the moment she saw him move, she turned and walked quickly down the street. Jack bolted out the door, heart thudding, but by the time he reached the street, it was empty. Nothing. No sign of her. No footsteps. Just wind. Except... He turned back toward the church and froze. There, in the dirt, clearly outlined in the morning dust, were footprints, smaller than his lighter, and not just leading to the door. They circled the entire building. Once, twice, 3 times. Not random, not hurried. Purposeful. Jack stared at them for a long time before heading back to town. The general store sat just off the main strip, its windows dusty but not boarded. A bell above the door jingled as he stepped inside. The man behind the counter, a wiry figure with a trimmed beard and hawk's eyes, watched him carefully. "I need some information," Jack said, voice low. "About the church." The man didn't move. "You bought it," he said after a beat. "Didn't think you'd last the night." Jack stepped closer. "Why does everyone avoid it?" The shopkeeper narrowed his eyes. "Some buildings carry more than wood and nails. That one was never meant for worship." Jack didn't have to fake surprise. "It's a church." The man shook his head. "It was built as a meeting hall back when this town still had dreams of being something big. But those dreams cost people everything. Like who, asked the Remington girl. Her father was the last man stupid enough to believe that place could hold the truth." Just then, the bell above the door chimed again. A woman entered, dark dress, dark hair, sharp eyes. Jack recognized her instantly. The same woman from the street. "You're the one who bought the church," she said. It wasn't a question. He nodded. "Jack Whitmore." "Claire Remington," she said. Her gaze didn't blink. "You need to stop poking around that place." He frowned. "Because it's dangerous, or because it's full of secrets?" Her jaw clenched. She looked at the shopkeeper, who busied himself with rearranging canned goods that didn't need rearranging. "My father was the last person to believe that building could still mean something," she said quietly. "He found things. Things that didn't want to stay found." Jack stepped forward. "Like what?" She studied him for a moment, measuring. "Old documents, property transfers, fake deeds, names, and what happened to him. He disappeared 3 days later. Jack nodded slowly. I want to hear more. Over coffee, maybe Claire hesitated, then nodded once. Fine. Tonight. At the diner next to the inn. She turned to leave, then paused. When you were inside, did you look under the altar? He blinked. No. Why, the floorboards there are different. Newer. And if you listen. She let the sentence hang in the air like dust. Listen for what? She turned back to him. You think you're watching it, she said. But something in that church is watching back. Then she walked out the door. Jack stood in silence, the words sitting like cold stone in his chest. The shopkeeper finally looked up. You'd be smart to leave before sundown. Jack turned to him. I didn't come here to run. He walked out without another word, the sunlight now sharp against his skin like it had grown teeth. That night, Jack would sit at the diner table with Claire Remington. He'd ask questions he wasn't sure he wanted answers to. And when dawn broke the next morning, he'd find himself standing at the altar with a shovel in his hand, prepared to dig into the truth literally. Because once you start watching something that watches back, you'd better be ready to see what's staring from underneath. The diner was nearly empty, save for an old ranch hand nursing a bowl of chili, and a waitress too tired to pretend she cared. Jack Whitmore sat in the corner booth facing the window. He'd chosen the seat so he could see the church in the distance. Even at dusk, its silhouette cut against the amber horizon, like a scar across the town. Claire Remington slid into the seat across from him without a word. She didn't offer a smile, and Jack didn't expect one. Her eyes were guarded sharp. Not cruel, just trained by loss. She didn't order anything. Just folded her hands in front of her, like she was holding a prayer she wasn't sure she believed in. My father found the truth, she said finally. 3 days later, he was gone. Jack leaned forward slightly, lowering his voice. Tell me everything. Claire nodded once, like she'd been rehearsing this in her head for years. 5 years ago, he came here to start fresh. Dry Creek was supposed to be different. Clean. He thought he could do good work in that church. Help people. But the town didn't want salvation. It wanted silence. Jack didn't interrupt. He started noticing things almost immediately. People coming to him about missing deeds, land sold without their consent. He thought it was just confusion, old papers, bad memory, but then he found the crawl space behind the pulpit. Jack's stomach tightened. There were old boxes stashed inside the wall. Documents, letters, signatures, property sales that didn't add up. My father was meticulous. He cross-checked every name, every claim. And the more he dug, the more he found that Dry Creek was built on stolen land. Not just once, but systematically. Jack frowned. Who was behind it? She tilted her head slightly, like she was surprised he needed to ask. Raymond Kessler, and his father before him. They were on the town council back when it still mattered. Every family that stood in their way, poor, brown, stubborn, or just unlucky, was either cheated, chased off, or buried under lies. Jack exhaled. And your father tried to expose them. Claire nodded. He was planning to ride to the territorial office with the proof, but the night before he left, he disappeared. Just like that, just like that. No note. No signs of a struggle. Church was boarded up the next morning. Town claimed the foundation had cracked, and it was unsafe. Jack thought of the new planks behind the altar. Claire reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a folded piece of parchment. She laid it flat on the table. It was a deed, yellowed, fragile. Jack read it carefully. The Hueros family, transferred to Dry Creek Council for the sum of $3. But it wasn't the amount that caught his eye. It was the signature. Kessler, he said aloud. Same hand that signed my deed. Claire nodded. He's kept the racket going. Quietly. Carefully. Until you showed up and bought the one building he couldn't bury completely. Jack tapped the edge of the paper. You said he disappeared. Did they ever find your father's body? She looked out the window at the church. The sun had nearly dropped behind it now, leaving only a burning outline in the dust. No, she said softly. But I know where it is. Jack froze. Where she turned back to him. Under the altar. Silence passed between them like thunder with no rain. He moved the altar just before he vanished. I remember the scuff marks on the floor. And I remember helping him clean up wood shavings, new boards he was cutting. He was hiding something down there. Or trying to keep something safe. Jack ran a hand across his face. Why haven't you dug it up yourself? I tried. Twice. Someone was always watching. Then Kessler started sending his men to remind me what happened to people who ask questions. Jack's jaw clenched. So why me? Why talk now? She hesitated. Because you're not from here. You don't owe anyone your silence. And you're already in too deep to turn back. Jack thought of the figure outside the church, the footprints the letter slipped under his door. You think I was marked the second I bought it? I know you were. The waitress finally approached to refill Jack's coffee. Claire waved her off without speaking. I'll meet you tomorrow, Claire said. Before dawn. Bring a shovel. Jack nodded slowly. We dig together. Claire stood. We finish what he started. She reached the door, paused, and turned. There's something else, she said. You should know before tomorrow. Jack raised an eyebrow. She stepped closer to the booth, lowered her voice. When you were inside the church today, did you get the sense something was off? Like it wasn't just old wood and dust? He nodded slowly. Yeah. Felt like I was being watched. Claire's eyes darkened. My father used to say places remember. Walls, floors, even the nails. Especially when something terrible happens inside. Jack felt the chill start in his spine and crawl into his chest. Maybe it's just memory, she said. Or maybe it's something else. But whatever's under that floor, it hasn't been forgotten. Then she turned and walked out, leaving Jack alone with a cold cup of coffee and 1,000 unspoken questions. He walked back to the inn as the sky went from orange to deep steel gray. The town had quieted again. No children, no dogs, just the faint creak of windmill blades and the squeak of a sign swinging outside the saloon. When he got to his room, a second note had been slipped under the door. Same handwriting, same rushed strokes, but this time 5 words. Don't go alone. He's watching. Jack stared at the message fingers tightening on the page. This wasn't just about land. This was about legacy, control, history written in someone else's blood. And now it was about him. He sat down, unfolded Claire's deed again, and studied the signature at the bottom. Raymond Kessler. The man who sold him the church like he was handing off a time bomb and hoped he wouldn't notice the fuse had already been lit. Tomorrow before dawn, Jack would follow Claire back into that church. And this time they wouldn't be looking for ghosts. They'd be looking for proof. For bones. For a truth someone wanted buried so deep no one would ever dare dig it up. He folded the note, turned off the lamp, and stared out the window at the dark outline of the church. And in the last light of dusk, he swore there was someone watching. The wind was still when Jack arrived at the church. No whistling through cracks. No creaking of the old sign above the door. Just stillness, thick and unnatural, like the air was waiting for something to break. The sky hadn't yet caught fire with sunrise, but it was beginning to gray around the edges. A soft light crept over the hills behind town, enough to cast long, dragging shadows across the dry earth. Claire was already there. She stood off to the side of the building, half hidden by a tall patch of scrub grass, one hand resting on the handle of a shovel slung over her shoulder. Her silhouette looked carved from the same stone as the town itself, worn sharp, unmovable. Jack raised his hand in greeting, and she nodded once. No words were needed. They walked together in silence to the front door. Jack pulled out the iron key, its weight colder than the morning air, and turned it in the lock. The door groaned again, slow and grudging, like something waking up that didn't want to. Inside, the stale smell hadn't changed, but now it came with something more. Expectation. Claire moved first. She walked straight up the aisle, stopping at the altar like she'd done it 100 times before. Jack followed, eyes scanning every pew, every shadow, every line of dust. The altar was heavier than it looked. Together they shifted it aside, grunting under the weight. It scraped across the floorboards with a sharp wooden moan. That's when Jack saw them. Newer planks beneath where the altar had stood. Slightly warped. Uneven. And unlike the rest of the floor, they hadn't faded under sun or foot traffic. He knelt and pressed his palm flat. It felt colder than the wood around it. He tapped once with his knuckles. Hollow. Claire crouched beside him and pulled a small crowbar from her coat. She didn't explain. Didn't ask permission. Just pride. The first board came up with more ease than he expected. The nails weren't driven deep, almost like someone wanted them to be found. The second board followed. Then a third. The space beneath was dark. Blacker than the space should have been, considering the boards had gaps between them. Jack grabbed a lantern from his satchel, struck a match, and lowered the light into the hole. The beam fell on loose dirt and canvas. His stomach flipped. Claire's voice was barely audible. Churches are meant to bury sin, but this one buried the sinners too. Jack swallowed hard and reached down, brushing the dirt away. It was wrapped tight, old canvas, frayed at the corners, tied with thick rope. The outline beneath it was unmistakably human. Another few inches of digging revealed more bundles. Another shape. Then another. Claire didn't look away. Her face was pale but resolute. That's him, I know it. Jack looked at her. You're sure? She nodded. My father wore a silver ring with a black onyx stone on his right hand. Jack gently peeled back part of the canvas. The smell that came out was sharp, dry, old decomposition long since finished. The hand beneath was skeletal. On its bony finger, the ring gleamed in the lantern light. Claire's breath caught, but she didn't cry. She just closed her eyes for a moment. This was never a church, she said. It was a boardroom with blood on the walls. They both sat back on their heels. The silence pressed in again. But this time it wasn't oppressive. It was waiting. Jack looked at the space again. We can't just leave them like this. No, Claire said. But we need proof. Not just bones. She reached into the grave beside her father's remains and pulled something free, a small metal box, rusted at the corners but intact. She opened it carefully. Inside were papers folded and wrapped in oilskin. Jack pulled one out. Signatures, deeds, names. They forged everything, Claire whispered, even the town's founding claim. Jack sifted through the documents. Land deeds dated and signed. Names repeated again and again: Raymond Kessler, Miles Thatcher, Boone Harper, some of the town's oldest family lines. The rot ran deeper than he thought. He heard it then outside, the crunch of boots on dirt. Multiple pairs. Claire's eyes met his. They know. Jack killed the lantern and stood. Back door. Claire nodded. Through the vestry. They grabbed the metal box and ducked down behind the remaining pews, moving quickly through the shadows. As they reached the side hallway, they heard the front door open. 3 sets of footsteps entered. Slow, careful. One of them spoke low, smooth, and unmistakably Raymond Kessler. I really hoped it wouldn't come to this, Mr. Whitmore. Jack didn't stop. They slipped into the back room, what had once been the pastor's quarters. It smelled of old wax and dried leather. Claire pointed toward a small window half covered in a sun-faded curtain. Jack cracked it open, wincing at the creak, and shoved the box through. Then Claire, then himself. They landed hard on the ground outside. Claire rolled, grabbed the box, and pointed down the alley. Stable. 2 blocks. We can cut through the tannery. As they ran, Jack glanced back once toward the church. Kessler stood at the door. He didn't yell, didn't follow. Just stood there watching, smiling. They reached the stable just as dawn broke across the ridge. Jack hurried to saddle the horses, every motion sharp with adrenaline. Claire kept lookout by the doors. She held the box tight against her chest like it was a piece of her father. Just as Jack tightened the last strap, a voice rang out from the stable entrance. Give me the box, Whitmore. Kessler. He stood in the doorway, pistol drawn, face twisted into a grin that didn't reach his eyes. Behind him, 2 men approached from the street. You have no idea what you're interfering with. Jack stepped between Claire and the doorway. I know exactly what I'm interfering with. Kessler stepped forward. That church isn't your business. Never was. You want to run real estate scams, fine. But this is history. Dry Creek is built on those foundations. Jack didn't budge. You built a graveyard under a pulpit. I don't care how much gold you pulled out of this land, that's not history. That's murder. Kessler's smile faded. I've buried men for less, he said coldly. Then hoofbeats. Fast, sharp, growing louder. Jack turned just as a group of riders thundered down the main road. Badges glinted in the morning light. Claire's face lit up. The federal investigator. He came early. Kessler's eyes went wide. His pistol wavered. Jack stepped forward, voice low. Run, Kessler. Or hang. As the lawmen approached, Kessler turned and fled into the alley, his men scrambling behind him. But it was too late. The evidence was in Jack's hands. The graves were open, and the sun had finally risen over Dry Creek with nowhere left to hide. Jack turned to Claire. This isn't over. No, she said, gripping the box tighter. Now it finally begins. Sheriff Amos Boyd lit a cigarette with trembling fingers, the match's flame flickering against the cracked window pane of his office. He wasn't a man who usually smoked during daylight, not when people could see it anyway. But today wasn't usual. He stared across the street at the church. The door hung open, and a federal agent's horse was tied to the post out front. The sun had barely crested over Dry Creek's rooftops, but it already felt like the whole damn town was watching, even if no one said a word. Jack Whitmore knocked once, then let himself in. Boyd looked up slowly. His eyes were red-rimmed and tired, like someone who hadn't slept since the war ended. "I suppose you've come to rub it in," he said, voice hoarse. Jack tossed a folded paper onto the desk. It landed next to the sheriff's ashtray. A copy of one of the land deeds signed by Raymond Kessler. Boyd didn't pick it up. "I'm not here to gloat," Jack said. "I'm here because I need your help, The sheriff stared at the document like it was a live snake. "I used to think I was helping," he muttered. "Keeping peace, keeping people calm. Now I realize I was just sweeping the bones under the rug." Jack leaned on the desk. "You knew." Boyd let out a bitter laugh. "Course I knew. Everyone who's been in this town longer than a decade knew something was off. But nobody wanted to be the first to say it out loud. You know what they say around here?" Jack waited. "In Dry Creek, silence ain't golden, it's bought." He ground the cigarette out hard. "Kessler's daddy paid for a whole lot of silence, and I kept cashing it in." Jack nodded slowly. "But you helped me at the mine. You showed up." "I did," Boyd said, "because I'm tired, Whitmore. Tired of pretending. And maybe you're the hammer finally breaking this rotten floor open." Jack pulled out the tin box, opened it, spread the documents across the desk, wills, forged transfers, missing persons reports, all tied to the church and to Kessler's family. "You're still sheriff," Jack said. "That means you can protect Claire. You can help the feds. You can start fixing this." Boyd stared at the pile like it was a coffin he didn't want to look inside. Finally, he nodded. "Where's Claire now, resting?" Jack said. "She didn't sleep last night. She's been digging up her father." Boyd flinched. "I remember him. Real decent man. He tried to report this 5 years ago. Disappeared the night before he left." Boyd swallowed hard. "You think Kessler had him killed? I know he did." Boyd rubbed his temples. "You know what the worst part is? I signed some of those papers. Thought they were clean. Didn't check too close. Trusted Kessler. Thought he was just trying to grow the town." "Some towns shouldn't grow," Jack said. "Not when the roots are poison." The door opened behind them. Lena Vargas stepped in a folded towel over her arm and a look in her eyes that Jack hadn't seen before, tight, focused, and angry. "I heard what happened," she said. "People are talking again. The right kind of talking." Boyd blinked. "Lena, this isn't—" "No," she interrupted. "Don't give me that. You know what they did to my husband, what they did to my land. They wrote it off like it was bookkeeping. You told me to keep quiet, to move on." Boyd looked away. "They took our ranch, Amos. My boy still asks me when we'll go back. And all this time you knew I was trying to protect what I could." Lena stepped forward, slapped the towel down on the desk. Underneath it was a worn ledger. "My husband kept everything. Receipts, letters, payments he made on that land. You think I'm the only one? There's a dozen families in this town with stories like mine." She looked at Jack. "I'll talk. I'll sign a statement. And I'll find the others." Jack gave a small nod. "We'll need every name." "Good," Lena said. "Because they're done being quiet." An hour later, Jack and Claire met outside the church again. The federal investigator, Marshal Wade Harper, was walking the perimeter, scribbling notes. A few deputies gathered near the grave under the altar. They were marking out the edges with chalk, setting up for a full excavation. Claire still hadn't said much. She hadn't needed to. Jack handed her a canteen and sat beside her on the steps. "They're going to arrest him," he said. "Harper has enough now, and Sheriff Boyd's backing it up." Claire didn't look at him. Her gaze was fixed on the graveyard across the street. Fresh holes had been dug there waiting for the remains. "I want him to stand trial," she said softly. "I want him to look at me while they say my father's name out loud." "He will." Claire finally turned. Her eyes were rimmed red but dry. "Do you believe this town can heal?" she asked. Jack looked around. The people passing by weren't avoiding the church anymore. They looked even stopped watching what was happening. Some nodded at him. Others just stared. "It's not about healing," Jack said. "It's about remembering." She nodded slowly. "You ever think about why it was a church? What do you mean?" "The original building," she said. "It wasn't meant for sermons. It was a place where deals were made, where lies were written into law. But they built it like a church, with pews, with a cross, like they were praying for the right to be forgiven before they did the killing." Jack let that settle between them. So he said finally what now Claire stood. "We finish it. We talk to every family. We open every grave. We give back what they took. You're not going to let this go, are you?" "No," she said. "And neither are you." He chuckled. "Guess not." As they walked back toward the sheriff's office, a woman stepped out from the alley and blocked their path. She was small, older, wrapped in a brown shawl. Her face was deeply lined, but her eyes were sharp. "You're Jack Whitmore," she said. He nodded cautiously. "And you are Martha Lou Green." "I knew the pastor, and I saw what they did to him." Claire stepped forward. "You saw it?" Martha Lou looked around, then pulled them both into the alley. Her voice dropped to a whisper. "They buried him alive, tied him up and threw him under that floor. I was in the back room hiding. I saw it all. But I was too scared to stop them." Jack felt his throat tighten. "You'll testify, I will," she said. "And I got more." She handed Jack a worn envelope. Inside were photographs, old yellowed, but clear. A group of men standing around the church altar digging. Kessler was in the center, younger, but unmistakable. "Where'd you get these? My late husband took them. He wanted to expose it, but he died in a fire not long after. I kept them safe." Claire reached out and took Martha Lou's hand. "Thank you." Martha Lou nodded. "You're not done yet." "And neither am I." That night, Jack sat by the window in his hotel room again. Only this time, the church didn't feel like a threat. It felt like a beginning. Tomorrow they would start naming the dead, and the town would have to listen. Jack rode alone, the moonlight trailing off the silver ridgeline like a ghost he couldn't shake. His horse moved cautiously down the narrow trail toward the abandoned mine hooves, crunching over gravel and dried roots. The night was too quiet, and no owls, no coyotes, just the creak of saddle leather and the wind whispering like a warning. He wasn't sure why he came. The note had been simple: "Meet me at the Silverhorn Mine. Midnight. Come alone." No signature, no promises. Just another secret Dry Creek didn't want said aloud. But Jack was too far in to start hesitating now. Too many bones unearthed. Too many lies exposed. The old mine came into view, its entrance black as pitch and half collapsed. Rusted rails snaked out from the shaft, now broken and bent, swallowed by weeds. An old mining cart lay tipped over near the entrance, its wheels frozen in place. A makeshift torch glowed dimly near the opening. Someone had been here. Maybe still was. He dismounted quietly, tied his horse to a tree, and drew the revolver from inside his coat. He didn't come here to shoot, but that didn't mean he came unarmed. He approached the mine shaft slowly, eyes scanning every shadow. Hello, he called, voice low. No answer. He stepped closer past the old support beams and into the yawning dark. The air turned cold almost instantly, like walking into a tomb. He saw footprints in the dust, recent, smaller than his. Someone had come alone. Then a whisper. Jack. He turned too late. A figure slammed into him from behind, driving his shoulder into the rock wall. His gun clattered to the ground. He struggled, throwing an elbow backward, connecting with something solid. The figure grunted, stumbled, and Jack turned just in time to see a second man moving in with a blackjack raised. The blow struck the side of Jack's head, and the world tilted. He dropped to one knee, blood rushing in his ears. Then another blow came hard and fast to his ribs. He collapsed, fully gasping. Bootsteps circled him. Two shadows now. One leaned close, breath sour with whiskey. Should have stayed out of it, the man muttered. But I guess you wanted to see what's under the dirt so damn bad. Jack spat blood onto the stone. You work for Kessler. The man didn't answer, just raised the blackjack again. But a voice cut through the dark, sharp as a knife. Drop it, now! A beam of light flashed across the cavern, lantern in one hand, pistol in the other. Sheriff Amos Boyd stepped into view. The two men hesitated, then ran. Boyd didn't fire, just watched them disappear into the shaft's depths. Then he turned to Jack and holstered his weapon. I told you not to come alone, Boyd muttered, helping him to his feet. Jack groaned. How'd you know I was here? Boyd held up a crumpled envelope. Same note showed up at my office. Figured it wasn't your handwriting. Jack leaned against the mine wall, catching his breath. Someone set me up. Looks that way. When truth rides in after midnight, blood usually follows, Boyd said, almost like he was quoting scripture. Jack chuckled, then winced from the pain in his ribs. Hell of a sermon. They made their way out of the shaft, Jack limping slightly. Outside, Boyd lit a cigarette and handed Jack the match. What now? The sheriff asked. Jack pulled the envelope from his pocket, examined the handwriting again. It's rushed, left-handed, someone faking a scrawl to look urgent. You recognize it? No, but it means someone inside town wants this to stay buried. Boyd nodded. Could be Kessler. Could be someone working for him. Jack's jaw clenched. Or someone else who signed those deeds. They rode back toward town in silence, the stars glinting cold above them. By the time they reached the edge of Dry Creek, the first streaks of dawn were starting to stretch across the sky. Boyd pulled his horse to a stop. I've got something else, he said. Been holding on to it too long. He reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a small leather notebook. Belonged to your friend's father, Pastor Remington. He gave it to me right before he vanished. Told me to keep it safe. Said if anything happened to him, someone would come asking. Jack took it, fingers tightening around the worn cover. He opened it slowly. The pages were dense with notes, names, dates, sketches of the church floor plan. Symbols Jack didn't recognize. He knew, Jack whispered. He knew everything. And I did nothing, Boyd said. Not until now. Jack looked up. You're doing something now. The sheriff turned his horse toward the jail. It ain't redemption, but it's a start. Back at the inn, Claire was waiting. She rushed down the steps the second she saw Jack's bruised face. What the hell happened? Jack handed her the notebook. I got jumped. 2 of them. Mine shaft. Somebody didn't like me getting close. Her hands trembled as she flipped through the pages. This is his handwriting. Jack leaned against the post, wincing again. He recorded everything. There's stuff in there that's not in the box. Claire stopped on one page, her eyes narrowing. Look at this. A hand-drawn symbol, 3 interlocking circles etched in dark ink. I've seen this before, she said. It was carved into the back wall behind the altar. He told me it was the mark of the Council of Claimants, the original founders. Jack stared at the page. It's a signature. A warning. Maybe both. Claire looked up at him. We need more than this. We need someone to go on record. Jack hesitated, then pulled out the envelope Martha Lou Green had given him. Then maybe it's time we talk to someone who's lived with the truth longer than either of us. Claire opened the envelope, eyes widening at the photos. Where did you get these, Martha Lou? Jack said. She saw it happen. Everything. The night they buried your father. Claire's breath caught. She said she'd talk. Jack nodded. She's ready now. Claire closed the notebook gently and looked at him. So are we. Outside, the sun crested the far hills. Dry Creek looked the same, but it wasn't. Because now the silence was cracking. And once it broke, nothing would be able to stop what came next. Jack Whitmore stood outside Lena Vargas's boarding house with his jaw clenched and his shoulder still sore from the mine ambush. Morning heat hadn't burned off yet, but he was already sweating, and it had nothing to do with the weather. Inside, Claire was briefing Lena Martha Lou and Sheriff Boyd. Jack had stepped outside for air and time to think. Every hour brought new truths, and every truth painted Dry Creek darker than the last. Behind him, the front door creaked open. Claire stepped out, shutting it gently behind her. Her expression was tight. She's ready to talk, she said, nodding toward the parlor. Jack studied her face. Claire looked tired, but there was steel behind her eyes. The kind of resolve that came from holding grief too long, and finally having somewhere to put it. They walked back into the parlor where Martha Lou Green sat in a high-backed chair holding a cup of coffee she hadn't touched. The old woman's hands trembled slightly, but her voice didn't when she finally spoke. I watched them carry him in, she said, like a sack of feed. They thought I wasn't home, thought my husband and I had gone out of town. She set the coffee down. I was in the back room. I could hear everything through the boards. Jack leaned forward. Who was there, Kessler? The old one. Raymond's father. Raymond was there too, younger, louder. 2 others. One was Harper Boone, he's long dead. The other I couldn't see, but he had a voice like gravel in whiskey. Claire's voice was tight. And my father. They beat him. I heard him praying. Then he screamed. Her hands shook harder now. I wanted to go to him, but I was scared. My husband said if we got involved, we'd end up in that hole too. Jack sat still, letting her words settle. I watched them bury him under the altar, Martha Lou said. Like he was nothing. They laughed after. Said that was the last sermon he'd ever preach. She looked up, eyes blazing. I've lived with that for 5 years. I'm done hiding. Claire stepped closer and knelt beside her. Would you be willing to testify? Martha Lou nodded without hesitation. You bring the law. I'll bring the truth. Later that afternoon, Marshall Harper sat across from Martha Lou with a tape recorder on the table and Boyd acting as witness. Her testimony was clear, firm, and damning. When she finished, the room was silent. Harper stood slowly and looked at Jack. She just gave me everything needed to bring Kessler in. We'll move tonight. Quiet, no spectacle. Jack nodded, but something gnawed at him. He knows we're getting close. He sent men after me last night. Someone's still protecting him. Harper narrowed his eyes. You have a name not yet. But whoever sent that note knew I'd be alone, and knew I'd go. Harper folded his arms. We've got momentum now. Let's not lose it. As the sun set, Jack and Claire returned to the church. The grave had been carefully marked and roped off by the investigators' team. Local workers had begun setting up for proper exhumation. Claire stood at the threshold, staring at the altar. I can't stop thinking about it, she said. Him down there. All this time. Jack didn't speak. He just stood beside her. You don't kill people to keep secrets, she said. You kill them because they found the truth. Jack finally looked at her. And now we've got the truth. She shook her head. Not all of it. There's still someone missing. Jack frowned. What do you mean? My father mentioned a man, she said. Said he was the key. Someone who worked with the original council. Helped write the fake deeds. But he vanished before the trial. Name, he only ever called him the bookkeeper. Jack stared back at the church. If he's still alive, he knows everything. That night back at the boarding house, Jack couldn't sleep. He sat at the small writing desk, flipping through Pastor Remington's notebook again. On the last page, scrawled in fading ink, was a name. Elias Grady. Jack shot upright. That name had been on one of the deeds he'd found. A co-signer. He ran down the stairs, knocking on Claire's door. She opened, groggy but alert. I found him. The bookkeeper, Elias Grady. He signed off on half the land transfers in the Remington files. Her eyes widened. Where is he now? Last known location listed on the document, Harper's Crossing. That's 2 counties over. We leave at dawn. She nodded. And if he's dead, then we find his grave. And if he's alive, we find the rest of the rot. Outside, hidden in the alley between the general store and the saloon, a man lit a match and watched the boarding house through narrowed eyes. He struck the match once, let it burn, then dropped it, and walked away. The road to Harper's Crossing was little more than a ragged trail that wound through dry canyons and scrub-dotted hills. Jack and Claire rode side by side beneath a gray morning sky, the silence between them thick with purpose. Their horses kicked up dust, their eyes stayed sharp, and neither said much until the small town came into view, a cluster of buildings clinging to the edge of relevance like Dry Creek's quieter, more tired cousin. Jack pulled up his reins and scanned the modest street ahead. One saloon, a post office, a general store, and a courthouse that looked like it hadn't held a real hearing in 10 years. You think he's still here? Claire asked. If he's alive, he'll be hiding in plain sight. They tied their horses near the stable and stepped into the general store. An old man behind the counter looked up, his face lined like desert rock. We're looking for someone, Jack said. Name's Elias Grady. The man blinked. Grady Clare stepped forward. He'd be in his 70s now, maybe older. Used to be a clerk or land appraiser. The man nodded slowly, suspicion flickering in his eyes. That old hermit lives out by Sycamore Ridge. Hasn't been into town in months. Where exactly? Jack asked. The man gave directions, then narrowed his eyes. You law. No, Jack said. Just looking for the truth. They rode another 1.5 miles to Sycamore Ridge, where a dilapidated shack sat nestled among twisted trees and rock ledges. Smoke curled from the chimney, faint and thin. Jack dismounted, first approached slowly. Elias Grady, he called out. A cough came from inside, then a voice. Who's asking? Jack stopped at the door. My name's Jack Whitmore. This is Claire Remington. We're from Dry Creek. Silence. Then that town still standin'. Thought it would have eaten itself by now. The door creaked open. An old man with sunken cheeks, a whiskey-stained shirt, and eyes that had seen too much peered out at them. "I'm not interested in digging up the past," he muttered. Claire stepped forward, voice cold and firm. "Then you'll have no trouble talking about the people buried under our church." Elias went still. Jack met his gaze. "You were there. You signed the deeds. We have the documents. And we have a witness." Grady exhaled through his nose. "Of course you do. Took longer than I figured." He opened the door wider. "Come in. If we're gonna do this, might as well finish it." Inside the shack was crammed with paper boxes, stacked high maps, rolled and stuffed into cracks between beams, ink-stained ledgers piled on furniture. It smelled like old ink and older guilt. Elias sat heavily on a creaking chair and poured himself a splash of something dark. His hands shook. "You think I was one of them," he said, not looking at either of them. "And you wouldn't be wrong. I was the numbers man. I made the paperwork look clean." Claire didn't blink. "Why? Because I was hungry and stupid. Kessler's daddy offered me a cut on every land flip. All I had to do was change a few dates, forge a few signatures. Most folks couldn't read too well anyway." Jack paced the room. "You knew people were being run off their land." "I knew," Elias said. "But I didn't know they were killing them. Not at first." Claire stepped closer. "But you found out." He nodded, eyes clouding. "They brought me to the church one night, made me watch, said I needed to understand the stakes. They dragged in a man. I didn't know his name at the time, but I know now it was your father." Claire didn't flinch. "He was bloody, tied up, said he had a ledger that could ruin them. They wanted to know where he hid it. He didn't break, so they buried him, right under that altar." Elias drained his cup. "That's when I walked away. I disappeared. Came here. Never signed another paper again." Jack stared at him. "But you kept everything." Grady nodded to the boxes. "Every copy. Every fake deed. Originals too, where I could. I figured one day someone might come asking." Jack moved toward the boxes. "We need them. All of them." "You can have them," Elias said. "But you better be quick. You came all this way, you stirred the dust. That town," he shook his head, "it don't forgive." Claire looked out the window, something catching her eye. "Jack." He turned. She pointed through the dirty pane. A rider in black just cresting the ridge. Then a second. Then two more. Jack cursed under his breath. They followed us. Grady stood. "There's a back door, leads to the canyon path." Jack started grabbing ledgers. "You coming?" Elias shook his head. "I'm old and tired, and I already buried my sins. But I'll hold 'em off long enough for you to run." Jack hesitated, then nodded. "You're braver than you think." Grady chuckled bitterly. "No, son. I'm just out of time." They burst through the back, ducking low as bullets cracked behind them. Claire clutched the box of documents while Jack led them down a rocky trail that wound through narrow canyon walls. The horses had been spooked and fled. There'd be no riding out. Behind them, gunshots echoed. Grady had fired back. A final stand. They ran until their lungs burned, until the ridge was out of sight. Claire stumbled, dropping to one knee. Jack helped her up the box, still clutched in her arms. "We got what we came for," she gasped. "Now we use it." He looked back once more. Smoke curled up in the sky behind them. Grady's cabin was burning. By the time they reached the edge of Dry Creek again, it was near dusk. Their clothes were torn, their faces streaked with sweat and dirt. They crossed town without speaking, past people who watched, but didn't ask. Inside the church, Marshall Harper stood by the altar waiting. Jack dropped the box on the table. Claire opened it. Dozens of documents, deeds, maps, signatures, proof. Harper flipped through them with growing intensity. "This is it," he said. "This seals it. Kessler can't talk his way out now." Claire leaned on the pew, eyes hollow, but determined. "We're not done yet," Jack said. "There's one more grave to open." Harper raised an eyebrow. "Which one?" Jack looked down at the altar. "The one behind the wall, because the final secret of Dry Creek wasn't buried in the ground. It was hidden in the bones of the church itself." Marshall Harper ran his fingers along the warped wood paneling behind the altar, pressing his ear close to the wall, as if it might confess something. Jack and Claire stood nearby the box of Elias Grady's documents, now open on a side pew. Its contents spread like evidence in a courtroom that hadn't existed until now. "It's hollow," Harper muttered. "You were right." Claire didn't move. Her arms were crossed, her eyes fixed on the wall, like she already knew what was waiting. Jack handed Harper a pry bar. "Let's get to it." The wood cracked with a groan as the first board came loose. Dust billowed out, thick and ancient. They peeled back more boards, revealing a dark cavity behind the altar just wide enough to crawl through. The stench hit first stale and sharp, the kind that clung to memory. Harper grabbed a lantern and ducked inside. Jack followed. Claire hesitated for half a breath, then went after them. Inside the chamber was no bigger than a root cellar. Stone walls, low ceiling, and in the center a table, a crude slab of wood. Shackled to its sides were rusted iron cuffs, and above it, carved into the stone itself, were 3 interlocking rings, the same symbol from Pastor Remington's notebook. Jack stared at it, his voice barely above a whisper. "They didn't just kill people here." Claire's voice was cold and sharp. "They made a ritual out of murder." Harper moved around the slab, carefully holding the lantern high. This wasn't just about hiding bodies. This was about control. Claire stepped closer to the symbol on the wall. "The Council of Claimants," she said. "That's what they called themselves. They didn't just steal land. They made blood a part of it." Jack found a leather-bound ledger tucked beneath the table. He opened it slowly. Pages of names, some crossed out, others with dates beside them. "This is a kill list," he said. Claire took it from him, her hands trembling. "There are dozens of names here." Jack looked around the small room. "This is why my deal was sabotaged. Why your father died. They weren't just protecting money, they were guarding a legacy, a ritual, a secret cult embedded into the founding of this town." Harper exhaled sharply. "We're not dealing with simple corruption anymore." Jack nodded grimly. "We're dealing with a cult of power." They returned to the sanctuary just as Lena Vargas and Sheriff Boyd arrived. Lena took one look at their faces and the dust clinging to their clothes. "You found it." Claire handed her the kill ledger. "We found what they didn't want us to." Boyd flipped through the book and stopped at one name. His shoulders stiffened. "My uncle," he said quietly. "He went missing in '62. They said he left for Arizona." Claire stepped beside him. "He never left. They made sure of it." Boyd's expression shifted from grief to fury in an instant. "I want him," he growled. "I want Kessler in irons before nightfall." Harper nodded. We've got enough now to file charges with the circuit judge. I'll ride to the district office myself. Lena stepped forward. We need to warn the town. People need to know what's under their feet. Claire turned to Jack. How do we do that without starting a panic? Jack looked around the sanctuary, once a place of silence, now echoing with the truth. We speak first. We hold a gathering. In this church. And we tell them everything. Boyd frowned. You sure about that? If we don't, Jack said, they'll hear it from Kessler. Or worse, they won't hear it at all. By dusk, word had spread. Lanterns were lit throughout the sanctuary. People packed the pews, whispering, watching. Faces lined with suspicion, fear, hope. Some of them had long suspected. Others were hearing rumors for the first time. Claire stepped up to the pulpit, the same place her father once stood. She didn't hesitate. My father died for this town, she said, and so did many others. Not by accident, not by fate, but by design. The murmuring began to rise. They were buried in silence beneath this very floor, and the men who did it called themselves founders. They left behind symbols, records, lies, and we have found them all. She held up the kill ledger. This book is filled with names. Some of them are yours. Fathers, mothers, siblings, landowners who disappeared, neighbors you were told left in the night. Jack stepped beside her. We have proof, we have documents, and we have witnesses. He looked directly at the crowd. But we also have a decision to make. We can pretend this didn't happen and let the rot stay buried. Or we can face it together and make sure this town never belongs to men like Kessler again. From the back, a voice shouted, He's still walking free. What's stopping him from running? Boyd stepped up. He's under watch. And the marshal's riding to file charges. We have what we need. Lena moved next to Claire and raised her voice. They took my husband's land. They took my peace, but they won't take this truth. We stand together now, or we fall apart again. A ripple moved through the crowd. Anger, sadness, unity. Jack looked around the room and saw something he hadn't seen in Dry Creek since he arrived. Conviction. After the crowd dispersed, Jack, Claire, Boyd, and Lena remained in the church. The sanctuary was quiet again, but not silent. It buzzed with the weight of change. Claire sat on the front pew, exhausted. We cracked it open, she said. But what comes next might be worse. Jack sat beside her. There's always backlash when you pull something rotten into the light. She nodded slowly. What if he runs before the charges land? Jack looked toward the altar. Then we chase him. And this time we don't stop at the truth. We take everything. Across town in the Kessler estate, Raymond Kessler stood at his study window looking down at the lights glowing from the church. He sipped whiskey and didn't blink. Behind him a man stepped from the shadows. One of the same who ambushed Jack at the mine. They found the wall, the man said. Kessler nodded slowly. Then we burn the whole thing down. Smoke rolled through the nave like a serpent, low, thick, and stinking of oil. Jack jolted awake to the acrid bite in his throat. He sat bolt upright on the cot behind the altar and scanned the room. Flames licked the wooden pews near the rear. Someone had torched the church. Claire, he shouted, already moving. She stumbled out of the side room, coughing, her eyes wide with terror. Back door, he barked. They ran together toward the vestry, dodging falling embers and smoke-blackened beams. Jack shouldered the door hard. It didn't budge. Barred from the outside. They were trapped. Jack threw his weight into it again, once, twice. The latch cracked. He yanked it open and they stumbled into the alley behind the church, gasping for air. Flames curled higher behind them, lighting the early morning dark in flickering gold and red. Townfolk were already gathering, some with buckets, others just staring. Sheriff Boyd arrived seconds later, hair wild, shirt half-buttoned. Kessler Jack growled, chest heaving. He lit it himself or sent someone. Boyd nodded grimly. He's not in his house. Took his horse before sunrise. Claire stepped forward, face pale but set. We warned the town. We showed them the truth. And this is his answer. Jack turned toward the burning church. When fire is the last weapon, it means the liar's running out of words. Boyd looked at the blaze. It's not just arson. It's erasure. He's trying to bury the story before the law catches up. Jack's hands clenched at his sides. We still have Grady's box, the deeds, the ledger. He didn't stop us. Claire shook her head, eyes locked on the flames. No, but he's trying to scare everyone else. Make them think silence is safer. 2 hours later, in the charred skeleton of the church, Jack found the box, still intact, scorched, but not destroyed. The stone under the altar had cracked, revealing more bones buried deep beneath. Human remains. Marshal Harper returned just before noon, his face stony. We've got the arrest warrant. Judge signed it himself. Jack handed him the box. You're 3 hours late. Harper eyed the ashes. He burned the evidence, he tried, Jack said. But not all of it. Claire moved beside them. We still have the kill ledger. Grady's documents. And now we have bodies. Real ones. Harper nodded slowly. Then let's bring him in. They rode out just past midday, Jack, Claire, Boyd, and Harper, along the ridge trail toward the northern route. It was the only road Kessler could take that didn't run straight into towns already warned. Boyd's deputy had spotted fresh tracks along Dry Creek Pass that morning. Hoofprints, heading for the high basin. I know where he's going, Boyd said. There's a cabin up there. His father's old hunting retreat. Remote enough to hide for weeks. The trail narrowed, climbing into the hills. By late afternoon, the sun dipped low behind the ridgeline, casting long shadows across the rocks. Jack pulled his horse to a stop and pointed down a narrow valley. Smoke curled from a chimney tucked deep in the pines. He's there. Harper raised his rifle slightly. We go quiet. No gunfire unless necessary. But Claire shook her head. No. He needs to hear it. He needs to see we're not scared. Jack met her eyes. This is your call. She stared down the trail, face tight. Then we knock on the front door. They dismounted 50 yards out and approached the cabin on foot. Wind stirred pine needles across the path. No birds. No noise. Boyd stepped onto the porch first and pounded the door with the butt of his revolver. Kessler, come out. We've got a warrant. No answer. Harper signaled for a breach, but the door opened slowly, creaking on its hinges. Raymond Kessler stood in the frame, dressed in a crisp white shirt, hands empty. A small smile curled his lips. Took you long enough, he said. Claire stepped forward. You burned the church. I cleansed it, he said calmly. That building was never about worship. It was about legacy. And I won't let you poison what we built. Jack's fists clenched. You mean murder, theft, a blood cult under the cross. Kessler tilted his head. You're not from here, Whitmore. You don't understand what Dry Creek really is. Harper stepped in, reading from the warrant. Raymond Kessler, you are under arrest for arson, conspiracy to commit murder, and multiple counts of unlawful seizure of land under forged deeds. You will come with us peacefully, or we will use force. Kessler didn't move. Do you really think this changes anything? He asked. Claire stepped forward, voice sharp. Yes, because we're not afraid of you anymore. That landed. His smile faltered. Harper moved in with cuffs and Kessler allowed it, though his eyes never left Jack. You think this is justice, he said, voice low. But you're just the next wave of settlers. You'll build on the same dirt. And it's still soaked with the same blood. Jack leaned in close. Maybe. But at least we won't lie about it. The ride back to town was quiet. People lined the street when they returned, watching as Kessler was marched through the dust in irons. Some shouted, others spit. A few just turned away in silence. Boyd led him straight into the jail and locked the cell with finality. Marshal Harper began prepping the paperwork for extradition. Jack and Claire stepped outside. The sky was orange and violet, the church now a smoldering skeleton behind them. He'll face trial, Jack said. Real trial, with everything we've got. Claire didn't answer for a moment. Then, he said we'd build on the same dirt. Jack looked at her. He's not wrong, but that doesn't mean we can't build it better. She nodded slowly, staring off toward the horizon. I want to rebuild it, she said. The church, not for sermons, but for remembrance, a place where people can bring truth instead of burying it. Jack smiled faintly. I think your father would have liked that. She looked up at him. I think he'd like you. That night, a storm rolled in over the hills, and for the first time in decades, Dry Creek didn't flinch when the thunder cracked. The rain came heavy and sudden, drumming against the jailhouse roof like fists demanding entry. Inside, Raymond Kessler sat alone in his cell, arms folded, eyes closed, head tilted slightly like he was listening to something only he could hear. Marshal Harper sat at the desk nearby, shuffling documents by lamplight, but he kept one eye on the prisoner. Sheriff Boyd paced the back hallway, agitated boots echoing off the wood floor. Jack entered, soaked through hat-dripping coat dark with rain. Claire followed, clutching a small bundle of papers wrapped in wax cloth. Harper looked up. Judge's office wired back. Trial date's been set 2 weeks out in Calverton. Jack tossed his coat onto the chair. That gives him 2 weeks to stir the pot. Boyd grunted. He doesn't need time. His roots go deeper than we thought. Claire stepped forward and unwrapped the bundle. Inside, copies of more deeds letters and a sealed affidavit signed by Elias Grady before they left his cabin. I went through Grady's second ledger, she said. There are more names. People who profited. Some are still on the town council. Jack picked up a deed. He wasn't just the architect. He was the accountant. Harper frowned. If the council's compromised, this trial's already at risk. Claire's voice sharpened. What's justice worth if the soil it stands on is still rotting? Everyone went quiet. Then Harper said, We make it public, all of it, full list of names. We put it on the church steps and nail it for every eye to see. Boyd crossed his arms. Town won't like that. They don't have to like it, Jack said. They just have to face it. That night, Jack and Claire posted the list across town on the church ruins, the saloon wall, the schoolhouse fence. 31 names, some known, some whispered. By morning, the wind had torn a few pages loose, but the message was clear: this wasn't over. Outside the general store, townsfolk clustered, reading with narrowed eyes and hushed voices. Lena Vargas stood among them, arms folded tight, watching them all. Inside the jail, Harper unlocked the door and entered with breakfast for Kessler. The old man looked up, amusement dancing in his eyes. Turning the town against itself, he said, "You're doing my work for me." Harper set the tray down. "You burned a church. You killed a preacher. You stole the land from under dying men's boots. That town's not turning, it's waking up." Kessler leaned forward, fingers wrapping around the bars. "You think they'll change, you think truth makes saints. I've lived through 5 sheriffs and 4 judges. They all came to my table eventually." Harper stepped closer. "Not this time." Kessler smirked. "We'll see." At the boarding house, Jack sat with Claire and Lena reviewing affidavits and cross-checking Grady's maps with property lines. Every hour unearthed new fraud. They buried the truth beneath foundations, Lena said. "Even our school sits on stolen land." Claire stared at a surveyor's sketch. They redrew the town. Jack ran a finger along a trail marked in red ink. "This," he said. "This is what they didn't want us to find." Claire looked closer. "That leads to the southern ridge." "There's a vault there," Jack said. Grady mentioned it in passing. Said it was where the first land scrolls were kept, before the new deeds were registered. Lena stood. "If those original records survived." Claire nodded. "We could prove everything. Not just the murders, but every theft, every lie traced back to the beginning." They rode out that afternoon. Jack, Claire, and Boyd. The trail to the southern ridge had narrowed with overgrowth, and the storm from the night before had left the path muddy and treacherous. Hooves slid, and twice Boyd's horse nearly lost its footing. Finally, they reached a slope where the trail ended at a rock outcropping. There, Claire said, pointing to a faint wooden frame barely visible beneath tangled vines. They dismounted. Jack cleared the brush and found an iron ring embedded in the stone floor. A trapdoor. Together they heaved it open. A rush of cold air escaped, damp, earthy, ancient. Boyd lit a lantern. "Let's see what ghosts they left us." They descended into the vault stone wall's narrow passage. At the far end, a locked iron door. Jack produced a set of keys from Grady's ledgers. He wrote, "This opens the first lie." The key fit. Inside they found chests filled with brittle scrolls, parchment deeds, and leather-bound ledgers stamped with seals long forgotten. Claire lifted one and read aloud. "Original deed of sale. March 1859. Signed by all 6 founding members." Jack opened another and held it up beside one of Kessler's fakes. "They erased entire families," he said. "Replaced them with ghost names." Boyd found a black cloth bundle in the corner. Inside bones. Small. Fragile. "A child," he said, voice hoarse. Claire swallowed hard. They didn't just steal land. They silenced generations. Back in Dry Creek, word spread fast. The vault, the names, the child's bones. It hit the town harder than any list. At dusk, Lena called for a gathering in front of the charred church. Over 60 people showed. Claire stood before them, holding one of the original deeds. "This town has been living on stolen ground," she said. "Built on lies, watered with silence." Jack stood beside her. "We can't change the past," he said, "but we can drag it into the light and make damn sure it never happens again." Someone shouted, "What about the council?" Lena stepped forward. "They're resigning. All of them. Tonight." Gasps rippled through the crowd. "Dry Creek's getting new leadership," she said. "And it starts with truth." Inside the jail, Kessler watched the lanterns flicker outside the window. The chants, the gathering. His kingdom was crumbling. Claire stepped into the doorway, arms crossed. "You thought this town would protect you," she said. "But you were never Dry Creek. You were its shadow." Kessler smiled thinly. "Then enjoy the light. It won't last." She stepped closer. "No, but the truth will." That night, for the first time in decades, the church bell rang again. Someone had pulled it from the ashes, cleaned it, hung it back up on a beam. It tolled once, then twice, then 3 times. Each chime was a reckoning. The sun rose over Dry Creek the next morning with a quiet sort of defiance, pushing golden light through the smoke-stained horizon and breaking across rooftops still slick with the memory of rain. A wind rolled through the streets, gentle but not empty. It carried something new this time. Not ash, not silence. It carried promise. Jack Whitmore stood where the church used to be. The foundation was all that remained: blackened stone, scorched beams, and a single charred wooden cross still lodged in the earth. Around him, townsfolk were already gathering with hammers, fresh lumber buckets of nails, and no orders. Just movement. Claire Remington walked up beside him, sleeves rolled up, hair tied back, eyes determined. She was holding a blueprint drawn by hand the night before. "It won't be a church in the traditional sense," she said. "No pulpit, no pews. Just an open room and a wall where people can leave names, stories, truths." Jack nodded slowly. "A sanctuary for memory." She looked at him, and for once her eyes didn't carry the weight of loss. They held something lighter. Peace. "I'm staying," she said. Jack looked at her, and for the first time since he stepped off that train weeks ago, he wasn't already halfway out the door. "Then maybe I will too." Across the square, children played with sticks in the dust. A man painted over the sign above the mayor's office. Lena Vargas passed out paper slips ballots for the first open town council election in 30 years. The town was changing, slowly, imperfectly, but undeniably. Inside the jailhouse, Raymond Kessler sat in silence, the smile long gone from his face. He had no visitors, no allies left. His trial date had been moved up. A federal judge was being brought in from Denver. The law, real law, was coming. Marshall Harper stood at the train station with Boyd and Lena readying to escort Kessler out that afternoon. The crowd would be large but calm. Dry Creek wasn't looking for revenge anymore. It had chosen something harder: accountability. Later that evening, Jack and Claire walked the Ridge Trail where her father used to take her as a child. The land stretched wide and quiet before them, fields, scattered homes, golden brush catching the last light. "I used to think justice was something loud," Claire said. "Something explosive. A verdict. A headline." Jack raised an eyebrow. "And now I think it's quieter than that. It's someone showing up every day to do right, even when it doesn't erase the past." Jack looked out at the horizon. "You can't fix the land," he said, "but you can plant something better on it." She smiled. They stood there a while, the wind brushing through the tall grass like a hymn. That night, the bell rang again. Not to signal death, not to call for vengeance, but because someone had carved a name into the wall of the new sanctuary. Isaac Remington Preacher, father, truth teller. And someone else had added another Elias Grady Coward. Witness, redeemer. Then came more Samuel Vargas, taken, never forgotten. Martha Lou Green, voice of memory. Each name carved in uneven lines. Not perfect, not professional, but real. That wall would grow, and so would the town. Weeks passed. Jack helped oversee the rebuild of the sanctuary of the land deeds of the voting system. He and Claire worked together almost every day. Arguments were common. So was laughter. The distance between them shortened not with grand gestures, but in the steady rhythm of shared purpose. One evening, Jack stood outside the boarding house with a letter in his hand. It was an offer, a job in Montana, land brokerage, good pay, clean slate. He folded the letter and didn't open it again. The next day, he gave Claire the deed to the Remington property his name struck from the transfer. "You should have it," he said. "Not for money, for history." She looked at the paper, then at him. "Stay." He didn't answer right away. But he didn't leave. Kessler's trial was held publicly. Federal. Broadcast on radios across the state. Witnesses lined up: Claire, Boyd, Harper, Lena, even old records brought in from Elias's vault. The jury deliberated for less than an hour. Guilty. Life sentence. No parole. But that wasn't the end. It was the beginning. Investigations spread to neighboring towns, other councils, other cover-ups. What started in Dry Creek rippled across the counties like cracks in a frozen lake. And people started talking. Not just about what had been buried, but what could be built next. Years later, the sanctuary stood firm, weathered, but whole. Children played inside. Old men sat beneath its beams and told stories without shame. A teacher used it as a classroom once a week, turning truth into curriculum. And every year on the anniversary of the fire, the bell rang 12 times, one for each victim found beneath the floorboards. 12, but also 12 months, 12 steps, 12 chances to get it right. Jack stood outside that building one autumn morning, older now, grayer, but grounded. Claire joined him with a coffee in each hand. She passed him one. He took it. No words needed. They watched the children run past, one of them yelling, "It used to be haunted," another replied, "Nope, just full of secrets." Jack chuckled. "Not anymore," Claire said. Jack looked around. Dry Creek wasn't healed, but it was honest, and that was a start. The truth doesn't just demand to be told, it demands to be carried. And now someone finally was.